All right, today we're going to talk about the three most common mistakes I see people make on short-term rentals. I get asked this stuff all the time, or I hear horror stories from people that have already closed on something and they realize that they made some big major blunders before they bought a property that they either have to be forced to sell, or they may just not get the revenue or the profitability that they were hoping to get out of their property. So I just want to run through three common mistakes really quick. Number one, they didn't accurately account for all their expenses on the property. I'm going to go through detail on that. Number two is they didn't accurately project realistic revenue that they would get on that property. And number three would be HOA or other city-town restrictions that they didn't realize were in place where they were purchasing. Those things can change at any given time. So if something was existing on a city-town, as an example, 2 years ago, it can change the month before you close. So just going into detail really quick on all three of those to hopefully have you avoid pitfalls before you purchase. So on the expense side of things, that's going to be everything from did you accurately project the maintenance that you would need monthly? That's going to be handyman type stuff that's just going to crop up. And then, of course, putting money aside for CapEx items. Capital expenditures are things like the HVAC that's eventually going to need replaced, the big ticket items like a roof or anything else that's going to be, not necessarily annual maintenance, but setting aside money in a coffer that's going to be able to fund some of those bigger ticket items as they come up. Other expenses include, is there flood insurance needed on the property? Do you have hot tub maintenance or pool maintenance that you're going to have? Could it be being realistic on your expenses of utilities, water, sewer, trash, really getting an idea on the electric bill. Like if you have a pool or a hot tub or a sauna, as an example, that electric bill is going to be way higher. EV charger, same deal. So same with gas. If you have a gas fireplace, those tenants are going to use the gas quite frequently. So you don't want to assume that the utility bills are going to be the same as what your utilities are at your personal house, as an example. Other things could be getting a handle on the consumables, toiletries, paper towels, all that kind of stuff. I mean, the bigger the house, the more the bedrooms, the bigger the group, the higher your consumables want to be. And then lastly, could be things like cleaning and any other line items. You just want to just be very conservative when you're running your expenses on the front end. Don't think that they're going to be lower than they really are, so that you can really get an accurate picture of what you're going to be up against after you close. Of course, you got property taxes, regular insurance. There's other expenses. I'm just trying to give some common things to think about that could be on your property that you may not be allocating for. And then, of course, the next one would be the revenue side of things. This is a common mistake. Number one, did you accurately get the occupancy and nightly rate that you needed? I always say, like with AirDNA, you're going back in time to look at the history of a property. AirDNA can be a great tool, a software platform to use to look at historicals for like-kind properties in your market. Yes, there are other software platforms similar to AirDNA. I'm not endorsing them. We do use them as well. But when you look at them, you have to look at them at a granular level. What I mean by that is, if you have a property that's 4 streets off from the beach and you're pulling in numbers from AirDNA that have beachfront properties, you're not going to stack up on revenue apples to apples. So you have to be super careful when you're analyzing the numbers that they pull. It's just like when you look at Zillow, right? Like Zillow is not going to tell you if that house is in an opportune an opportune area of your neighborhood. It's not going to allocate for those things, like if it's on a busy road or whatever, right? So the algorithm that AirDNA uses is not 100% accurate. So knowing that, you have to take those numbers with a grain of salt. And what I like to do is actually go in and look at the actual competing houses on my street in their algorithm or on their software, right? That's the most accurate way to really compare, and then make sure that the people you're comparing against are operators. Meaning, do they have at least 30 reviews where they have an existing operation? If you're pulling numbers from a listing that only has 2 reviews, that's not accurate, whether their nightly rate or occupancy shows whatever. They haven't been out there long enough. So you don't want to compare against people that aren't really in your realm. And then on the nightly rate side of things, you have to understand that there are so many differences between the nightly rate between properties on how many people it sleeps, where it's exactly located in your area compared to yours, what are the amenities offered at that house, how well are they managing it? In other words, the communication level, is it a 5-star review or close to 5-star versus a 4.6-star property? All those things are going to influence that nightly rate. So you have to compensate for that. And then of course, seasonality. This is another big mistake. Unless there's not many markets that have 12 months of seasonality, right? Like you're going to have a peak season typically once a year that might last for 1, 2, 3, or 4 months. Then you're going to have shoulder seasons. That could be another 2 or 3 months. And then you're going to have your off season. And that's going to be the least popular time of the year. So as you're running those numbers, it's going to fluctuate. So instead of just taking the average daily rate from these software platforms and just throwing it into your matrix there on running numbers, really dig into the numbers and do the math yourself for every season, for every weekend, for every weeknight, Monday through Thursday, to really get very conservative about what the performance of that property is going to be. And then what I like to do as well is go into Airbnb and VRBO and other platforms if you can, like booking.com or wherever might be popular in your area, depending on your property type. And looking at the future, right? AirDNA looks in the past for historicals. Airbnb and VRBO, you can go into other people's calendars on their listings and say, okay, are they operators or not? Do they have at least 30 reviews, as an example? Only look at those. Don't look at the small mom and pops that just launched their place. And then of the ones you're looking at, look at their calendar. Are they fully booked out, or do they have a lot of bookings in the future? What are those dates that they booked? How often? What's their nightly rate? And that'll give you some good future data to then use against the historicals. Because if you look at historicals, and maybe during the COVID years, occupancy was way up higher than it is today across the board in time of this video. So you have to take these things into consideration. As you're underwriting your numbers, you're being conservative enough to know that it's not going to be a pie in the sky revenue stream and not enough on the expense side of things. Lastly, as I mentioned at the beginning, your mistakes that a lot of people make in due diligence is they're not doing their due diligence on, is there an HOA on the property? And if there is, did they really research the restrictions of the HOA, right? What I mean by that is that they take the seller's word for it or the agent's word for it they're working with and say, oh, no, you can rent nightly. Well, no, you can't always do that, right? Sometimes they have a 7-day or a 30-day minimum. Oftentimes they have a 6-month or a 12-month minimum for all leases. I cannot tell you enough how many times I hear people buy a property and they find out later that the HOA is restricting them. You want to make sure that HOA has voted in their community for short-term rental. If they haven't voted yet, you buy thinking that everything's kosher, and then you find out that they vote later after you took ownership that it's illegal. Now you're going to have to long-term the property or sell it. You're not going to be able to short-term. Don't think you can get away with it. They'll end up, fighting you tooth and nail, and it could cost you a lot of headache and money in the long run. The other one, of course, is the town or city you're in. Do they have any restrictions? This is a common mistake. Again, people don't look at the zoning. They don't research on the city or town website. You want to look for markets that have already voted. I would be very weary to go into a market that has not yet voted on short-term rentals. They've been around for years now, but there are still some markets that haven't voted, right? So you don't want to buy and close, start your operation to rent, and then find out, 6 months later that they finally vote to outlaw, or regulate your short-term rentals in your market because now you're stuck with this property. It's a whole nother conversation to get into that. That's more in property law of what's really fair or not. But at the end of the day, try to stick with markets that have already voted. And if they have, go in and read the regulations. Find out if there's any zoning within the city or town that allows it versus not. And if they do you have to get a permit? Does it require inspections? What is the red tape and taxes and fees involved in operating that property where you're looking to close it? So hopefully you're going through the process before you've closed when you're watching this video and not after the fact. But hopefully this video helps you. Again, these are just 3 common mistakes that I see people making all the time. They're not doing their numbers correctly on the expenses and the profits, and of course, or I should say the revenue. And then of course they're not really doing their due diligence on restrictions. So I'll be putting out more content like this. If you guys want to, please subscribe. If you have any questions in here, please leave me a comment, and happy to answer anything I can. Thanks.